And that was sort of the first time that I realized, the data is directly making a difference in, people's lives. Yeah, it was before that data was just, it was moving parts around. Uh, I worked for the mortgage industry and, it was financial stuff. But now I was at the point where this data was proving meaningful, in the lives and the health of real people. Yeah, that was a big thrill.
Welcome to Great Tech Pros. I'm Wylie Blanchard. Today we're talking to Chris Hyde, who has 20 years experience as a data professional and runs his own independent consulting company. A few interesting things about Chris is one, he likes cricket, and two, he loves loud music, typically not doing both at the exact same time. Today, Chris is going to talk to us about data analytics. Let's go ahead and jump in. Welcome, Chris.
Oh, thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So, Chris, let's start. Can you tell the audience a little bit about yourself and exactly what you do?
Okay, so I'm an independent consultant here in New Mexico. I have a consultancy that's just me at the moment. I specialize in business intelligence, data analytics, database administration, primarily on the Microsoft data platform. And I've been independent about 4 years now. That's been going very, very well.
So with that, can you give us a little bit more information about what those roles are and what they mean? Exactly what do you do in those roles?
Well, that's a loaded question. So one of the reasons that I love what I do is I get to do something different, all the time. So let's talk about a few of the different roles that I mentioned. So I mentioned business intelligence and data analytics, and a lot of that is getting data from one place to another, uh, getting data from disparate systems and kind of munging it together so that you can get insights, but so that the data from each system kind of means something together. It's not apples and oranges. You're turning the oranges in one system into apples so that you can join that data together and then get some insights from that. So that's probably the majority of what I do. Then we have, I mentioned database administration. That is more handling the infrastructure side. Uh, it can be tuning the performance to make sure that things run as fast as possible. It can be securing the data, whether that comes in the form of encryption, it comes in the form of creating appropriate access so that only the people that can that are allowed to see the data can see it. And in terms of security, it also means, if we have a disaster, can we recover that data to where it was? Excuse me.
So
And
a
now,
question that's
data analytics is leading me into the world of data science, which is sort of my next step along my journey as a data professional.
and actually, that leads to a really, really good question that I often get from people is, what is the difference between, business intelligence and data science? Are they the same? Are they very different?
I think there is definitely a relation between the two of them. At the bottom of it all is we have a bunch of data. It's all ones and zeros. And we want to turn that into useful information to drive drive a change for the better in our business. Probably I would say the difference between the two is really the increased use of statistics in data science. A lot of business intelligence historically has been what they call descriptive analytics, which often is looking back. But it's taking all the data, all the measurements that we have, and then applying the descriptive part to it, which is the what, the who, the when, and all those things. Now, when we start talking about data science, we introduce the statistics. and we introduced, the power of computing to be able to run some of those very complicated statistics, uh, you know, at a level that's been, impossible up to this point. And in 2020, we're at a great spot where we're starting to democratize data science. And so what I mean by that is, up until very recently, to truly be a data scientist, you had to be pretty much a PhD statistician. Yeah, and those positions within data science aren't going to go anywhere, but they're going to become just the domain of the very, very large companies. But tools like Azure machine learning in the Microsoft space have become very, very easy to set up and to use and to do some of those things that 5 years ago were just the domain of the PhDs. And now we're bringing that down to regular people like me who are never going to go get that statistics degree at this point in my life.
Yeah, that's actually a good mention, because there are a lot of people really interested in becoming more data aware, either jumping in a role related to data science or business intelligence, or just becoming more knowledgeable on how to use data for whatever business function they have. I'm curious, how did you get into the world of data? What drew you to it?
So this is kind of my top secret origin story. Is I left college without getting a degree, and I became a machinist. So not really what I'd intended to do going into college. And then somewhere along the way, I started developing an allergy to the industrial solvents that we were using. My hands just cratered up like the surface of Mars. And so they had to take me off the line, and they put me into quality assurance. And, the new guy in quality assurance, they put me on the third shift, the night shift. There really wasn't a whole lot to do there. I, check the parts and, move on with my night. But I started getting into Microsoft Access to build databases there. I had the time to learn how to use it, learn how to use it right. And so I started building these databases to track, how are quality of parts doing? Are they increasing? Are they decreasing over time? That kind of stuff. I moved from that role into a quality engineer role. I took the step up just from the QA analyst into the engineering role. And my work became more and more to do with the data and the database. And then in about 2000, I decided, hey, if I'm doing this, I really should do it professionally. And I found a good opportunity in the telecom industry to become a full data professional. And I've just gone from there. And along the way, I discovered that what I really, really like is the meaning behind the data. Yeah, I mean, I enjoy the day-to-day tasks of getting the data from one place to another and keeping it secure. But what I really enjoy is that, what does this data actually mean? What do those ones and zeros, what do they tell me about my business or what my business can do?
So anything interesting that you've ever been able to learn from data and pull out of the data?
I mean, hundreds of things. I know, I could talk probably for the next 20 minutes about that.
Any stories jump to mind that you can share?
I will say one thing that really stuck out to me was when I was working in healthcare. And the doctor that I was working with had some, I forget the term, but he had some kind of some indicators that were known to maybe indicate early onset diabetes or how people were managing their diabetes. And through pulling some of the data out of our healthcare system, I was able to generate reports for our clinicians of the people who were in danger of their diabetes and worsening, possibly losing their eyesight or having problems with their extremities. And that was sort of the first time that I realized the data is directly making a difference in people's lives. Yeah, it was before that. Data was just, it was moving parts around. Uh, I worked for the mortgage industry, and it was financial stuff. But now I was at the point where this data was proving meaningful, in the lives and the health of real people. Yeah, that was a big thrill.
Yeah, what I found is that right now, with healthcare being such a major issue in our environment right now, that the data behind it is probably really going to help drive how we help people, whether it's who needs to be tested for their wellness, or how we move resources around the nation to help people who really need help from health professionals. Let's move into careers, and any thoughts or career advice that you have. I found a lot of people are looking into how can they move into a field related to business intelligence or data science, and I'm curious whether you have any advice on how they can make that transition.
Well, I think one way that a lot of people get into it is through their analysis. They start as an analyst in whichever business they're in, and they start working with Excel, tools like that. And then they start taking Excel to the next level by writing some code. They're writing some macros to automate the work, and then they start, cleaning the data up in an automated fashion. And then from there, it's only a short leap to, writing queries directly against the database to kind of cut out that Excel middleman. So any kind of analysis position that you can get is a really good entry to it. Another entry that a lot of people take is as a kind of a junior level developer or programmer. And then they start working on some programs that need to interact with the database, get data from it, put data back in, and they discover, hey, I really like this data side of it. So they kind of make that lateral move in their career from a developer to a data professional. So those are kind of the two main routes that I see a lot of.
And I know a lot of that querying language, there's a lot of different software languages that you can use to query data. What's popular right now, or what are the top languages that you're using to query data?
Well, ultimately, the main language is something called SQL, Structured Query Language. Now, there's an ANSI standard for that, but then all these different database companies, the SQL Server, the Oracle, the Postgres, they've all implemented slightly different versions of those. But the key is, if you know kind of the main parts of SQL querying, you'll always be able to get data out of a database. And now we're moving from that to kind of your more graphical analytical tools that are great to learn, whether you're using Power BI or Tableau as a way to drill down into your data. But ultimately, if you really want to, to get the step of a database professional, you really need to learn, SQL. Now, moving on from that, going into the data science world, sometimes you're not dealing with data that's nicely structured for you in a database. You may be dealing with a whole bunch of files that you have to kind of put all together, pull data out, or you may want to take that data that's structured nicely in the database, but pull it out and do more technical statistical analysis for it. And that's where you're going to want to use something like R or Python. And I'm more of a Python person myself, but it's pretty close to being a 6 of one, half a dozen of the other kind of proposition at this point for anything that I'm likely to do in my career. So yeah, SQL, and then R or Python. Kind of pick your poison there. It's less about knowing the exact syntax. It's more about understanding the kind of the underlying algorithms there. So you can't go wrong with either one.
So again, your recommendations are to start with something like SQL, and even before that, you may want to start with something related to Excel, like VB, Visual Basic, then move over to SQL, And then once you're ready to do more graphical analysis, a more deeper dive analysis, then move over to Python or R.
I think that's a good summation.
Okay, great, great. So, and you stated that you're an independent consultant. So, any advice for someone who's currently a full-time employee, who, or maybe they're ready to move into being a independent consultant, whether it be related to data or related to something else? Any advice for them making that transition into an independent consultant?
So what was really helpful for me was I had an intermediate step. So I went from being a full-time employee, uh, in a hospital system to a national consulting company that would send me to different assignments to work on the data of different systems. And so they would take care of all the billing, all of the, the getting the new work, and all I had to worry about was, doing a good job in each of these different systems. So I was seeing a lot of data. I was seeing a lot of different environments, a lot of different problem solving, but also I kind of, I had to learn to act a little, let me say, a little more professionally. Uh, for lack of a better term, not that I was not professional before, but I had to be more polished. I had to, document my work more, in this new environment. And then from that, at some point, I started helping them with the proposals for new work, things like that. Coming up with all the documentation that we use to sell, my services. And at some point, I realized, well, if I'm doing this stuff too, why are they taking 50% of my billable rate? What value am I getting out of that? And I had a good opportunity. I had some money saved up. I had a good opportunity to switch and go independent. I got that key first client that I knew would last for several months. And I was at a point in my life where it didn't feel like a risk to make that jump. So that intermediate step for me was the key. I kind of learned how to be a consultant before I kind of took on the risk myself, if that makes sense.
No, that's actually amazing to me that you saw the opportunity to transition into a consultant. I mean, you jumped on it. So would it be your advice to follow that footstep if, maybe if you have some extra money in your bank account, maybe that can hold you over for X amount of months, and then really make the decision that to jump after that?
I would say yes, if you have to be comfortable with the idea of risk. You have to be comfortable with uncertainty. Right now, I don't have a current contract in place because of the situation, and I'm okay with that. I can, I have things that I can do to prepare for the next step. In the meantime, I have, the the backup of resources to handle that. So I'm not too concerned about that uncertainty. There are people, I know plenty of people that uncertainty would cause them a great deal of anxiety, and that's no good. You might not be a good fit for an independent consultant in that case. The other thing I find, even when work is coming in, I'm getting 3, 4, 5 leads for every one that actually pans out. So it's, I can't live or die on any one contract. I can't feel like I've got to get this particular piece of work because it may not happen. It may be one of the other things that was floating around that suddenly it's that time for that client that they need someone. And for me, it works out. That uncertainty is not difficult for me to manage. But for some people, That's very difficult. So I would say if you want to make that leap into being independent, make sure that psychologically that's going to be a good fit.
Okay, excellent. So any tools that you've used now that you've made that leap, you've been doing it for a while, you're established as a consultant, are there any tools that you use, maybe they're not even related to data, that really help make your work as a consultant a lot easier?
I don't know that it's tools per se as much as just networking as much as possible. That that allows me to get to where I need to be. I speak at a lot of different conferences, and I found that I get most of my work uh, through that. I'm not in a direct kind of I go to this conference, I get this piece of work, but I build up the relationships with attendees that I see multiple times, and particularly with other people that speak at those conferences. And developing that network has been great. I guess not just to get the work, but also when I'm in there, I'm often the lone wolf. If I get stuck on something, I've actually got a whole network of people that I can connect to and say, hey, this is weird, have you seen this before? And I'll get an answer back from them very, very quickly. So that's probably my network is my most powerful tool, both for getting work and for being better at the work that I get.
Okay, no, actually that's a great thing that you mentioned. Can you mention some of those conferences that you're speaking at and building your network with?
Okay, well, because I'm in the Microsoft data community, I'm very fortunate that there's a group of conferences called SQL Saturdays or SQL Saturdays that during normal times, there's probably pretty much one or two a week just in the United States every weekend, and then in the rest of the world as well. And now Microsoft has taken their focus just from the narrow SQL Server ecosystem more out into the wider open source and data science world. You can really meet a lot of people, even if you're not kind of keyed into SQL Server. You can talk to a lot of people that are doing data science with Python or with R, or they're doing, they're not down in the data, but they're working with Tableau or Power BI. To do those kind of things. You really get that broad spectrum of here's a ton of different people doing a ton of different things with data, and you can go to these events, pretty much every weekend if you like to travel. Let's say kind of the umbrella organization of that is called PAST. They do a lot. They have a lot of virtual chapters as well, which now in this time is obviously great. But even once we get back to normal, there'll be people doing presentations, getting them up there, really spreading the knowledge out there to all the other data professionals. And you don't necessarily see that type of openness, in every community out there.
All right, thank you, Chris. Another question is, for someone getting started with business intelligence or data science or data analytics, any resources out there, books, courses that you recommend?
So with data science and data analytics being as popular as they are, the MOOCs, the massive open online courses, have really, exploded in terms of their offerings. So there are a lot of things out there that are fairly cheap, or even freely available on YouTube, particularly, that are good. So those are great, great entry points. So I understand a lot of people on the call may be starting to work with R for the first time. So I bought a couple of books along. So this is Learning R by Richard Cotton, that is really good, and R for Data Science by Wickham and Golemond. Those are both excellent books. If you like to learn from books, yeah, those are great places to start. Yeah.
Thanks, Chris. I'll make sure I put them in the in the post and the show notes after the show so that everyone can know where to find those books, those resources. Thank you very much. My last question to you is, if someone in our audience wants to reach out to you as their resource, how can we find you? Where should we go?
So the best place to contact me is on Twitter. I'm at Chris Hyde 325 on there. Please feel free to reach out. I'm probably on Twitter way too much. So if I connect with anyone on the call, I'm usually pretty quick getting back to people on there.
Excellent, thank
Yeah,
you. Well,
yeah.
Chris, that's all the time I have with you. I want to say thank you very much, and I highly appreciate you talking to me to speak with my audience.
Oh, no, thank you all for having me.
That's our full discussion with today's guest. If you want even more, you can tune into the extended version that includes the Q&A that the guest has with our audience. You can get that by visiting greattechpros.com. Also, make sure that you subscribe so that you don't miss out on our next great technology professional who's passionate about helping you become a great tech pro who's in high demand.